In this lesson, we'll be learning a very useful multi-purpose arpeggio, which means an arpeggio that can be thought of as several different chords. In this case, we can think of this one as 3 different chords. This is one of the most useful arpeggios I've learned in Gypsy jazz guitar. Like the diminished 7th arpeggio, it's a 2-note per string. 2-note per string arpeggio, and so for the right hand, things are quite easy. So it's a great one for developing nice fast flourishes, as well as being very versatile, because you can use it over 3 main chord types that come up in Gypsy jazz quite a bit. The arpeggio we're about to learn can be thought of as a -6 arpeggio, a -7 flat 5 arpeggio, or a dominant 9th arpeggio, which is a dominant 7th chord with the added color of the 9th. The use of the arpeggio changes depending on which note within the arpeggio you're considering to be the root note of the chord. Let's learn the arpeggio in 2 positions, and then I'll explain how to think of it in terms of those different chords. We'll be learning it starting on the root note being the root note of the -6 chord. So in this case, let's do it in the key of G minor so that we can put this into practice over dark eyes when we come to our etude. Starting with our fingering as usual. Index, middle, index, ring, index, middle, index, ring, middle, middle, index, ring. And back down. Ring, index, middle, middle, ring, index, middle, index, ring, index, middle, index. Okay, now for the picking. I mentioned before that this arpeggio has 2 notes per string, so it will be strict alternate picking as you move through this one. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and back down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Okay, and with the root on the 5th string, once again, it's just alternate picking, so I'll just articulate the fingering with the fretting hand. Index, middle, index, ring, index, middle, index, ring, index, pinky, pinky, index, ring, index, middle, index, ring, index, middle, index, ring, index, ring, index. So, as mentioned before, with this arpeggio, depending on which note you consider to be the root note, you can use it to improvise over 3 different common chord types in Gypsy jazz and jazz guitar in general. So, the most obvious one is treating the first note we started on as the root note to improvise over a G-6 chord. Another way we can use this arpeggio is revealed by looking at this chord shape here. This can be considered a voicing for G-6. There's our G up there. but it can also be considered an E minor 7 flat 5, if we consider that to be the root note. So this shape we have allows us to improvise over a G minor 6 and an E minor 7 flat 5. The important thing to notice here is that, in fact, they are the same chord. So it's not necessarily that you now have an arpeggio that is flexible for two different chord types, but that you now have one arpeggio that is an arpeggio of two chord types. It literally is the same notes. We'll put it into practice as a G minor 6 arpeggio quite soon. Now the third way of using it, if we go back to our original shape here, chord shape, this is a G minor 6 again. This last way of using the arpeggio is to consider this note sitting underneath the G here. This one here. This is a C. Now, this one actually isn't in the arpeggio. We don't have a C anywhere in the arpeggio. But in terms of playing over another chord, this is fine. And what I mean by that is, when you're playing an arpeggio over any given chord, you don't necessarily need to have the root note in that arpeggio in order for it to work. So in this case, we can play this arpeggio and think of it as a C dominant 9. The reason for this is, if you have a look at a C9 shape, which is this just here, then it's exactly the same bar one note as our G minor 6 shape, which is this as well. Just a one note difference. So going from that, it makes sense that playing a G minor 6 arpeggio, we'd be outlining a C9 without the root note. I wanted to introduce this arpeggio in this fundamentals course, even though it is considered in some ways an advanced arpeggio, as it has multiple uses, and we are talking about a bit of theory there. But personally, I found it to be one of the most useful, so I wanted to introduce it to you now, and we'll try and put it into practice over our etudes quite soon. I just want to mention as well that if some of those chord voicings seemed a little tricky or didn't make sense, then please consider taking the partner course to this one, which is Rhythm Guitar Fundamentals, in which all of these chords are covered in detail.